As a Marine, I too have seen weird shit in the Marine Corps. The Range by Rev Black Rage. I saw that you guys liked my post about being a ramp guard in Courthouse Bay. The one I wrote after reading 035 Nun's post. I figured I might share another. I'm not gonna lie to you, this one's a bit more brutal in places. A lot less lighthearted than the first one. If blood or interpersonal violence isn't your thing, you might want to skip the last quarter of the story. I was there, and I still don't know what happened that day. So, you won't be too in the dark. This was a couple of years after that night on the ramp, so 2008 or 2009. It was about 3:300 or 3:30 in the morning. Why were we up at such a godforsaken hour? We had vehicle gunnery range that day, and the Marine Corps likes to start early. We were at the ramp and no, the kid was not out playing that night. Morning, whatever. We were prepping our vehicles to move to the range. The vehicles in question were the AAV P7A and Ram RS. Big old tracked amphibious people haulers. Been around since the 70s, but continuously upgraded. They could take a Marine to the beach from a ship, drive up the beach, drop the ass under the vehicle, and disgorge about 24 Marines, and fight alongside them. Providing heavy machine gun support. Sounds pretty fucking cool, right? Total death traps though. Aluminum skin, a flat bottom, make them pretty vulnerable to shit, just about everything. I'll try to include a picture of one. I was sitting in the back of the vehicle I rode on, trying to will myself to wake up some more. Just a little more. The back of the vehicle was down and I was watching the Marines in my section prep their vehicles. My driver walked over to the back of the vehicle and stood before me. "Hey, Corporal," he said in that soft-spoken way that most boots have about him when speaking to someone who outranks them. "What's up, fuckface?" I asked, putting my lack of ability to be a morning person on full display. "You done pre-opping this bitch?" "Yes, Corporal," he said, pulling out a can of Cope Long Cut. He offered me a pinch out of the can, out of sheer politeness or being a suck-ass. I couldn't tell. I shook my head no, and the boot pulled a pinch for himself and packed it in his lip. "You hear about Bag of Dick's wife?" I had not, in fact, heard the current scuttlebutt on Bag of Dick's wife. I should clear up that Bag of Dicks was in fact a Marine in our platoon. And also that Bag of Dicks was a misleading, affectionate appellation. Now, Bag was a good guy, but he was hands down the worst Marine to ever squeak out of boot camp. He wasn't malicious in his shitbaggery, and he wasn't the go-to-the-brig kind of shitbag either. He was just a guy who couldn't get his head around the Marine Corps. He messed up ranks when talking to higher-ups, dicked up his uniform, had shitty time management skills, that kind of stuff. But he was a real give-you-the-shirt-off-his-back kind of dude, though. Somebody gets fucked up at PT, he is the first one there trying to render buddy aid. Poorly, albeit, but still trying. One of the boots gets bad news from home, he's the first one to sit and listen to him vent. It's just the kind of dude he was. Now don't get me wrong, we smoked the fuck out of him when he fucked up, but there was no real malice in it. Nothing personal, as they say. Just a desire to help get this kid right. His wife was a stripper at Cherry Gentlemen's Club out the back gate. Awful Marine. Typical boot, though. I looked over at the Marine standing next to the other AAV, or track, in our section. I could see him looking at his phone in the morning darkness. I could tell that he was anxious just from his body language. I looked back at the driver. "They have a fight or something?" I asked before burning my lips with shitty coffee. "Nah, Corporal," my driver said around the huge plug of chew. "She didn't come home last night. Not answering her phone neither." I leaned back in my seat and looked over at Bag. Well, that sucked. I watched for a minute more, and I watched him try to call his wife one more time. He held the phone to his ear, but eventually his shoulders slumped. He pulled the phone away from his ear. I looked over at my driver. "Grab Dungeon Monkey and get those guns mounted," I said. "I'll be back." In case you're wondering, the dungeon monkey is the rear crewman, who rides in the troop compartment, or dungeon. Some folks call their rear crewman the dungeon master. However, I think dungeon monkey sounds funnier. I got out of my seat and moseyed down a few tracks, to where Bag was staring intently at his phone, like he was willing it to ring. He had a grip on the phone that was damn near about to crush it. "Your hog ready to go, Bag?" I asked. Bag looked over at me, eyes filled with anxiety, and nodded. Now, normally, Marine Corps custom and courtesy dictated that he has to say something along the lines of, "Yes, Corporal," or maybe like a, "Oorah, Corporal," or some such overly moded nonsensical bullshit. But, like I said, Bag of Dicks had a problem wrapping his head around the Marine Corps. I was well within my rights as a non-commissioned officer to rip out his heart and eat his soul. But I wasn't there for that. On top of that, it just wasn't really my style. I stood there looking at him for a second. "You alright, Bag?" He looked down at his phone, then back up to me. "My wife never made it home from work," he said, a shaking worrying in his voice. She wasn't there when I woke up. I'm worried about her. She usually calls me if she's going to stay at a girlfriend's house, or if she goes home with a guy." "Well, maybe her phone..." I started to console him, but the full gravity of what he said hit me. "Hold the fuck up. Did you just say if she goes home with a guy?" He looked up at me, a terrified look on his face, like he had just said too much. Maybe he hadn't. Hell, maybe he had. Who the fuck am I to judge? That's kind of how we have things set up," he responded, a whole lot of timid in his voice. "I do the same. Not with guys. Well, not that I'm opposed..." "Stop talking." I cut him off. We were getting too deep into the weeds on this one, and I was not equipped to deal with what he was putting down. Not to mention that fucking a stranger, while married, and falling under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, meant brig time, and loss of rank and pay. No shit neither. The UCMJ was written in like 1899 or something, and it's updated about every century or so. Oral sex, giving or receiving, can technically get you brig time. It's still in there, so it's enforceable. Fucking Puritans. He just admitted to something that I was supposed to nail his ass to a wall for. I took a minute to realign my thought process and took a sip of my shitty hot coffee and said, "Shit, dude, maybe her phone died. Maybe she just got caught up with what she was doing. Let's not freak out." I said this in my best impression of a soothing tone. "If we haven't heard from her by noon, we'll try to get you off the range early so you can go check up on her. We just need to get through the movement. Can we do that?" He looked down at his phone and then back up to me. "Yeah, I think I can do that, Corporal." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Shit's probably okay, Bag. Real big brother shit. That's half the job of the NCO anyway." On my way back to my hog, I passed Bag's crew chief, who was dragging his gear in. He missed the accountability formation at 2:30. Our section leader would most likely chew his ass out for being late. Maybe smoke him. But it would be done in private, away from the eyes of junior Marines. "Nice of you to join us, bro," I called out to him. He dropped his pack and spun around and gave me the dual middle fingers with a shit-eating grin. He looked like he was still a little drunk from the night before. I remember feeling annoyed by my fellow NCO, but it was a transgression of which I was not innocent of. Not this morning, but in the past. "Hey, Bag is having an issue. Talk to him about what I told him." He waved over his shoulder and kept pushing. I had just lit up a smoke when my section leader called out, telling us to mount up. We would be pushing out soon. It briefly occurred to me that Bag had gotten his track ready to roll, without adult supervision. I remember thinking that there might be hope for this kid. We did a comms check and lined the vehicles up at the back gate of the ramp.
"Hey, Corporal?"
My driver's voice crackled over the CVC helmet.
"I think I just saw movement on the tree line."
I felt a pinprick of ice run down my spine. "Don't worry about it," I said. "We're about to push out. I don't think she'll follow us." I could see my driver's head poking out of his hatch. He turned and looked at me up in the turret. I could tell from the tilt in his head that he had no idea what I was talking about. I could see him reaching up to his helmet to push the talk switch. I said, "Don't worry about it, fucker." I snapped at him before he could let out. I turned and concentrated on the taillights of the vehicle in front of me. I wasn't creeped out by the little girl. Maybe I had been once. I mean, shit, I worked on the ramp. I wasn't eager to see her again, though. I looked down at Dungeon Monkey through the open cargo hatch on the roof. I held out my fist, thumb extended sideways. He looked back up at me, mirrored my gesture, and then turned his thumb skywards. That meant that nothing was currently on fire in the dungeon. The box he plugged his helmet into was currently fucked up, so he couldn't talk over the inner vehicle comms. Mute, but not deaf. I reached out and keyed my helmet out. "Let's wake this bitch up and go shoot some guns, boys," I said, a little more steady than before. Part of being an NCO is saying cool shit. It's an effort to make your guys feel like badasses. I do okay at it. I felt my driver shift the track into gear. A track jolts when you shift it into gear from park. Kinda like when you fake throw a ball for a dog. He starts to run but stops after a step, watching you because he knows you're a lying sack of shit. When a 903 cubic inch turbo diesel engine starts pushing 26 tons of twisted steel and sex appeal, it's loud. It's like a Valkyrie with a 2-pack-a-day habit, screaming right in your ear. I miss it. I honestly do. The Marine Corps recently started phasing out AAVs for some amphibious Italian armored car. It will never be as sexy as an AAV. We were just about to reach the first intersection of tank trail and road when it came out over the platoon net.
All Vicks, this is Bone Crusher.
The section leader on the lead track said over the radio.
Be advised, we got movement on the deck. Someone just moved into the trees on the left side of the tank trail. Don't got good eyes on them, but keep an eye out. Don't crunch no crunchies.
Grunts call everyone who isn't a grunt a pog, person other than grunt. Trackers call anyone who isn't a tracker a crunchy, because people crunch when you drive over them. Marine Corps humor is pretty complex. The track started roaring up and they had all copied. I didn't bother. I felt a knot start to form in my stomach. I grimaced to myself. I knew there was going to be some weird shit that day. I could feel it in my bones. We made the first road crossing, where the tank trail crossed over the road, which was actually a bit of a process. You had to push out road guards to stop traffic, and then clean up the crossing afterwards. Tracked vehicles slung a shit ton of mud, and the Marine Corps likes shit tidy. 2nd Tank Battalion used to just shoot across the road without pushing out road guards, even though it was ape law in the Marine Corps. They got away with it too. Until a captain was speeding down 5 Mile Road at 1 in the morning. If you ever wondered what a Ford Fiesta would do to an M1A1 Abrams main battle tank, the answer is not a whole lot. If you ever wondered what an M1A1 Abrams main battle tank would do to a Ford Fiesta, the answer is a lot. That little red car hit that tank at 80 miles an hour. It crushed itself, and pulverized that captain. They were pulling pieces of him out of the wreckage, not big ones either. I heard somewhere that the back axle of the car actually came through the front seat. Built Ford tough don't got shit on reactive armor. As we were crossing the road, I saw movement off in the trees across the road. I focused on that area and saw nothing more. I didn't bother calling it in, because it could have been anything, and it wasn't worth tying up the net over. As we pushed the tank trail, I noticed that the general procession of the vehicles slowed down. We were still too far off from the next road crossing for there to be any reason for it.
Megatron to Bone Crusher.
Our platoon sergeant called out to the section leader riding on track 1.
Why are we slowing down? It's not us, Megatron, we're cruising.
Bone Crusher replied.
Track 9 to Megatron.
Baggett's crew chief came across the radio, a slight slur in his voice.
It's us. My driver lost his balls. Probably why his wife left him. We're packing it up.
I remember getting pissed at my fellow NCO for that. putting his guy's personal shit out on the air like that, and giving him shit for it. Bag of Dicks was a shitbag, yes, but he was still a Marine and a man. That kind of thing would fuck with the kid's confidence. Not to mention his already shot nerves. Not a thing you wanted on a day where you were going to put him in control of belt-fed weaponry. I leaned back in my turret and lit a smoke. Without looking, I shoved the lighter in the pack and threw it down to Dungeon Monkey through the open cargo hatch. I knew he was going to ask for one. I swear I was the only motherfucker who bought smokes in that platoon. I took a drag.
Hey, Corporal.
My driver called out, his voice in my ear.
I swear I see something moving in the woods again. It's like it's moving alongside us.
Dude, watch the fucking road, I said. Don't worry about the woods. That's my job. I was trying to give him something else to focus on. Like his job or something. But the fact of the matter was, I could use something else to focus on as well. I looked at the track in front of me. Its crew chief and its version of Dungeon Monkey were both hanging out of their respective hatches and pointing at something in the woods. Fucking great. I muttered. We were being shadowed by something. That much was clear. I don't think it was a little girl, but to be fair, a lot of the shit I think is pretty fucking dumb. We were getting closer to the range, and the sun was starting to brighten up the blue sky. Bright spots of pinks and oranges crept over the horizon. I felt a little better knowing that the sun was coming out. I don't know why. There's plenty of weird shit in the sunlight too. Unfortunately, when we broke the tree line, right before our last road crossing onto the range itself, it was completely fogged out. Like, seriously fogged out. Not like the London fog where you can't see your own balls, but it wasn't far from that either. My body tightened up reflexively as we drove into it. Felt like we were driving into a wall. I remember thinking at the time that it was like the fog was waiting to ambush us as we exited the woods. The fog was a real foreboding motherfucker. I hated when we had to do crossings in low visibility. Puts the guys on deck in a lot of danger. But we managed to get through it without anyone getting crushed or run over. And we pulled onto the range itself. We stopped and put our ground guides on the vehicles, one in the front, one in the back, to guide the track into tight and dangerous spots. The deep fog bank would count as a dangerous spot. I was on deck in the front of my track. I could barely make out Dungeon Monkey 20 feet away at the back of the track. Until he snapped a chem light, a red one. The red light reflecting off the fog, and the stocky Marine in full body armor, with the color red in the shadows, it made him look otherworldly. Like a battle dwarf from hell. He snapped another chem light and tossed it to me. That was a good idea. We could see each other now. Since our flashlights had been made in the 80s and stopped working in the 90s. Dungeon Monkey was pretty smart for someone from Georgia, as I was fond of telling him. We moved the vehicles up to their firing points, and we dropped the ramps. My driver and the Dungeon Monkey joined me in the back of the vehicle. How did she do? I asked, inquiring about the mechanical integrity of the vehicle. Good to go, Corporal, my driver said, looking around this fog bank that was now our world. I didn't smell anything on fire, said Dungeon Monkey as he was holding out the pack of smokes I had tossed him earlier. He too appeared to be lost in the fog, just looking around, like something had him cornered. My driver was just a typical blank-faced boot, but Dungeon Monkey, he wore his emotions like a cheap suit. Alright, get her checked out and let's get those guns nice and juicy. Neither of them responded, still lost in the fog. I gave them a moment to respond before I did my best to pierce the fog. Hey, dickheads! I said, putting some bass in my voice. Sorry, Corporal, my driver, shaking his head like he was trying to shake out the fog. Shit feels weird out here, Corp, proclaimed Dungeon Monkey. My driver nodded in agreement. He wasn't wrong. Shit did, in fact, feel weird out here. I felt it too. You know that feeling you get when something bad's about to happen? Yeah, I fucking felt it. I was still a corporal of the Marines, so I had to put my dickhead hat on. You two are gonna feel fucking weird on balls to 4 watch if you don't get my goddamn tractor checked out, I threatened. They didn't quite scatter, but they did move. The driver heading up the ramp onto the vehicle, and Dungeon Monkey walking around the suspension, looking for obvious damages or leaks. I looked around the range. The fog seemed like it had pushed in on us a little. It may have been a trick of the mind, but it sure as shit didn't feel like it. I saw my section leader walking up the back of Megatron's vehicle. Figured it might be a good place to get some word. So, I followed him. "Fellas, we ain't doing shit in this stuff," Metatron preached to the section of leaders and a couple of random crew chiefs. "All we need is one of the boys to light up the Mark 19 in the wrong direction, or too close and we're fucking done, son. Communist NJPs. Everyone's getting one." A couple of Marines present chuckled. I looked at the assemblage and noticed a lot of apprehensive body language. Marines by nature are square-shouldered beasts filled with bravado and confidence. Out here, I'm noticing a lot of hunched shoulders and crossed arms. A few concerned faces. Everyone was feeling it. The weird in the air. I was considering commenting on it, but as an E4 sitting in on an E5 through E7 rating, I was on the council, but I was not granted the rank of master. So, I held my peace. "Check out the hogs, juice the guns, feed the boys, do not break out the ammo. We're gonna wait this shit out. So saith Megatron, so saith the law." After Megatron's sermon, the congregation broke up to spread the gospel. I fell in step beside my section leader. "You see anyone on the woods in the way in?" he asked me as we walked. "Yep," I said. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Like, saying it out loud somehow makes things worse. The air felt like it got heavier. I don't know why. My crew saw it too. They're spooked. They didn't get a good look at him, but my driver said he saw something shadowing us in the woods. My section leader slowly shook his head, in a more of an exasperated way. "Fucking hate this place," he mumbled. "You know, we found bodies on this range before." "No shit?" I asked. "Yeah, I was a Lance at the time," he said, launching into the story. "And I was sitting at the turret dumping 40 Mike into the old tank at the 1,000-yard line. I see something fly off it, and a ceasefire gets called. I poke my head out, and my RSO is standing behind my turret, looking down range with his binos. Had a real befuckled look on his face. Turns out some recon douchebag had gotten back from deployment and found out that his wife had cheated on him the whole time, with different dudes. So he kills her, tracks down the Jodies, kills them, and buries them all on the 1,000-yard line, in a shallow grave behind that tank. What I had seen flying up was a torso that I had dug up with the 40 Mike. They showed me a picture of the gravesite. HEDP grenades can do a number on bodies. Fucked with me for a little while. Kept having this dream that they weren't dead, just chained down watching 50 cal tracers ping off the tank. And then hearing that Mark 9 go off just before ceasing to exist. I still have that dream sometimes. "Holy shit," was the only response I could muster. Just, "Holy shit, boss." Sometimes therapy in the Marine Corps is actually just dumping a wild-ass story on someone, just to get it out of you. Yeah, that douchebag is still in Leavenworth. Last I heard, he was waiting on his turn to ride the lightning. There was some fucked up people in this world. Not every monster lurks in the dark. Speaking of douchebags, I was about to bring up Bagadic's crew chief and his poor leadership choices, when my section leader stopped short. I looked over him. He was staring off into the fog. I followed his gaze. There was something moving in the fog. A shadow. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was a person. Whoever it was, they weren't wearing body armor or a Marine uniform. I remember this feeling of dread washing over me. My body started to tense up. I remember the tips of my boots digging into the soil, like I was about to make a break for it. Total fight or flight reaction. There was some dark, heavy shit coming through that fog. I remember as it came closer, the fog started to reveal more details about our visitor. I was a little ashamed that I recognized her as a stripper from Cherries, before I recognized her as Bag's wife. I had met her at both capacities, but Bag sure as shit recognized her as his wife, as the anguished wail in the direction of the tracks behind us attested to the fact. It was her. She was mangled, all of her fingers went the wrong way, her elbow was broken outwards, and her arm dangled uselessly at her side. Her throat was torn open. I would say slashed, but shit. It was just not strong enough for the word. Her cheekbones broken, her lips split open, and eyes blackened. The sort of punishment you see in old lynching pictures. It was fucking brutal. Her eyes were dead. No emotion, no spark of life. She looked like a walking corpse. At least to me she did. I noticed that her feet and calves were covered in mud. Odd thing to notice, but I did. Bag shot past us, running towards her. That snapped me out of it. I shouted for a corpsman as I started to walk towards her. I would have run, but my primal lizard brain was telling me to get the fuck out of there. This shit wasn't right. My section leader listened to his instinct and stayed back. I didn't judge him for it. There was no way this woman should still be alive. I got no closer than 15 feet before I couldn't take another step. Whether it was my own cowardice or something else stopping me, I couldn't say. Bag got to her, though. Nothing held him back. As soon as he reached her, she collapsed and he went down with her. He put his arms around his wife and pulled her close. He started to sob, rocking back and forth with her in his arms. I noticed that despite her brutalized body and being covered in wet blood, none of it soaked into Bag's uniform. Another strange detail to notice, but I did. The mental image of this sobbing Marine cradling his battered wife. It's stuck with me through the years. It's quite possibly the most distressing thing I've ever seen. I realized he was speaking to her, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I noticed that her lips were moving too. But her words were not for me. A silent conversation. I felt more when I saw our platoon corpsman coming up beside me, but he made it about 2 steps further than I did. He did seem to be fighting it, though, trying to push through whatever was holding him back. His teeth grinding into themselves, a vein popping out in his neck. Corpsmen don't quit when a life is on the line, weird shit or not. If we were out there for 1,000 more years, Doc would have fought to get that woman the entire time. But he never made it on time. For more reasons than one. The woman gave Bags a smile, and that was the only time her eyes lit up. A smile amongst the backdrop was oddly soothing. Like a spot of light in a sea of pitch-black bullshit. I felt the dread in the air peel back a little. She reached up with her good arm, her smile melting into a warm grin. Then she ran a twisted finger down Bag's face, wiping away some of his tears. The palm of her mangled hand came to rest on his cheek. It was oddly tender given the circumstances. Bags had loved his wife, and she had loved him right back. She drew back a bit and looked him in the eyes. The light died from hers, the tenderness was gone. No. They got hard. They got real fucking hard. I've seen guys walk out of rooms full of dead bodies with more sunshine in their disposition. I felt the tension in the air ratchet up a couple of notches. The air felt like it got thicker. I just knew this shit was about to get dumber. Bags locked eyes with hers. He leaned in and rested his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes and nodded. We still had no fucking clue what was going on here. So, when she lifted her good arm and pointed, we all turned to look. I say all of us because most of the platoon was watching at this point. I had been so transfixed, I hadn't even seen the rest of the platoon come out to see what was up. 52 Marines spread around the range were all standing in various states of unease. Some were standing there wide-eyed. A couple of them were crying with Bags. A few were just standing there looking confused. I saw Bone Crusher standing there with a cup of coffee, and an expression that was the physical embodiment of the phrase, "What the fuck?" But when she pointed, we all followed her finger. Even the corpsman was able to break his concentration on her, to see what she had pointed at. Like I said, we all followed her finger. Except one of us. No. Not him. Bags' crew chief found himself on the business end of that mangled finger. Might as well have been staring down the barrel of a loaded 50 cal. Bags' facial features twisted into a mask of anger I had never seen on that kid's face. I had never even seen this kid get annoyed. He looked back at his wife. She met his eyes and nodded. He nodded back. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. He pushed himself up to his feet. The air got downright frigid as he rose. He turned and glared at his crew chief, not saying a fucking word, just glaring. Now, maybe that idiot was still drunk. Maybe it was the gravity of the situation just didn't register in his mind. I don't know. But he said just about the dumbest thing he could think of at that point. Dude, she was a fucking stripper, you fucking boot. She wasn't really a person. Yeah, he said that dumbass shit. Bag's eyes got wide. He reached for the knife he kept on his chest armor. It was a K-bar fighting knife. They had been a staple of the Marine Corps since World War I. They were made for killing. Weird thing to notice, but I did. Bag started towards his crew chief. His intentions were very clear at that point. The corpsman tried to reach out for him as he passed. Bags merely stiff-armed him. The doc fell out of the way. Even if you hadn't been there for 5 minutes, just by looking at Bags, you could tell what he was about to do. I had to try to stop him. Not for the crew chief's sake, fuck him. I just remembered not wanting Bag to go to jail. I was trying to move towards him, but whatever was keeping me from getting to the wife kept me from getting to Bag. I reached out for him. I got close, but not close enough. God damn it, Bags! I roared at him. Stop, motherfucker! You will go to the fucking brig! He ignored me. He didn't care. He had shit to do. A few others yelled for him to back down. We were all on Bag's side on this one. None of us wanted to see him get fried for murder, but none of us could move to stop him. We were all gonna watch as he committed murder. Sure, it was a murder we all agreed with, of course, but one he could never get away with. When he was an arm's length of his crew chief, he squared up with him. Dude, the crew chief sobbed, you need to chill the fuck out. Bag reached out and grabbed him by the throat protector of his body armor. He pulled him close and stabbed him in the belly underneath his flak. I watched him twist the blade and yank as hard as he could sideways. His crew chief's face went as white as a sheet, and the shock was evident. I had taught him that move during MCMAPs. It was surreal watching him demonstrate it on his crew chief. Of course, to be fair, the whole situation was a fucking horror show. I figured the only thing keeping the crew chief's guts in was his body armor. That's when the screaming started. Bags threw his chief in the dirt and started to work on his face with the knife. We all sat frozen, watching Bag cut this guy's face off. One of the boots who had just gotten to the platoon that month prior vomited down the front of his chest. I noticed that he had Chili Mac MRE for breakfast. Bizarre thing to notice, but I did. The screaming turned into a gurgle, and eventually the gurgling stopped. Bags held up a fistful of meat that used to be a face. He tossed it into the grass as far away as he could. To this day, I don't understand why he did that. What the fuck? I heard Metatron gasp out. I found myself to be in agreement with that statement. I briefly wondered how anyone was going to explain this to the higher-ups. Megatron was going to have a lot to explain. Bag turned around, slowly looking at us. I had never seen those eyes in his face. They were hard. His eyes were usually friendly and kind of dopey, but they were hard now. Well, I will admit he had just about disemboweled someone and then cut their face off, so it was pretty fucking understandable. He looked back to where his wife had been. She wasn't there anymore. He grunted and nodded to himself. Apparently he was pretty fucking pleased with that. He looked around at us again, all of us staring back shocked. He flicked his knife, slinging off bits of flesh and blood into the grass. He nodded at us again and jammed the knife into his own throat. No, goddammit! Somebody yelled. Now that I think about it, it was probably the corpsman. As far as he knew, he had 3 bodies on the deck, and he couldn't get to a single one of them. That must have been his own personal hell. Bag's eyes rolled back into his head and he fell. I don't know if he died of blood loss, or if he suffocated to death. Most likely it was the blood loss. But as soon as his corpse stopped kicking, I could move again. I looked over to my section leader. He shook his head and said, I fucking hate this place. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my $10 and above patrons: Dan R., Paul Z., Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, and Ethan A. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you enjoyed the most recent Patreon-only video that I uploaded a few days ago. And if you want access to some Patreon-only content, and you want your name read off at the end of the video, or down in the description as you can see in the Patreon section, please consider joining up as a patron. That link will be down in the description as well. Thank you.